Hi and welcome back to the channel. If it's your first time here, my name's Lee. On this channel I cover geopolitics, travel around China when I'm there. I'm currently out of China, and also I cover technology. Now, a couple of days ago I uploaded a video outlining my views and thoughts and a number of facts surrounding the protests in China. Now, those protests were in a number of cities, a lot of university students, but it became quite apparent those protests were infiltrated by foreign operators, and the message in the media in the West moved to that these protests were to overthrow the Chinese government and Xi Jinping, the leader. And that is strictly not true. As I outlined in that video, a majority of the Chinese people do not want to see an overthrow of their government. They believe their government has done very well for them over the last 25 to 30 years. And I think a majority of Chinese people are relatively happy with their government. However, those protests were widely reported in Western media because of the narrative they were able to use. Now, there have actually been more violent protests going on which have not been widely reported by Western media, and those have been in an area of China, a large city called Guangzhou. And generally those protests have been by the local people, and they've been protesting because they've been in lockdown for quite some time. There's an area of Guangzhou called Haizhu which has had a large outbreak of COVID cases, and for about the last 4 or 5 weeks they've been pretty much in a lockdown, and the local residents there have been getting more and more upset that this is affecting their livelihoods, etc., affecting their income. They have to pay rents, they have to pay mortgages, they can't run their businesses. And in the last 2 to 3 days this started to overflow into protests, and these protests started getting more and more violent. So together with the protests that happened over the weekend and these protests that have been happening in Guangzhou, there's been a major shift in COVID policy within China, and that shift is into easing the lockdowns. Now, as I said in my previous video, a lot of these COVID restrictions have been implemented by local government, and they haven't been strictly following the central government's guidelines. However, it seems in Guangzhou that there has been a very, very large relaxing of restrictions. This is not to say lockdowns are going to end altogether. It's just to say that they will be much more limited and targeted, and the criteria for close contacts has changed. Many people are going to be allowed to quarantine in their homes. And something really, really interesting that happened last night. The Canton Tower, which is a landmark icon within Guangzhou and can be seen for many, many miles. A message was displayed on there in Chinese, but the English interpretation of it is that you are responsible for your own health. And this sends out a very, very clear message. There was also a meeting chaired by Sun Chunlan, who is the vice premier, and she's the woman who is sort of seen as the lockdown czar. She was the one who came in and took control of things during the Shanghai lockdown, and she had a meeting with many health experts today. And what's come from that meeting is, interestingly, that meeting was reported by Xinhua, and Xinhua have no mention of dynamic COVID zero in the piece that they produced after. So it looks like China are finally moving away from a dynamic COVID zero approach. Now, what do I think is going to happen? Well, it also, from speaking to my wife who's in Shenzhen, she's telling me that lockdown restrictions and COVID restrictions are being relaxed. No longer, since midnight last night, no longer does she need to have a 48-hour or a 24-hour COVID negative. As long as she has a green code, she can get into places. There will be some exceptions to that, I would imagine, like hospitals and some government buildings. However, to get in and out of supermarkets and her compound where we live, You don't need to have a 24 or a 48-hour code. You can just literally walk in and walk out. Now, this is what she's telling me. Now, if you want my opinion on this opening up, what I think is going to happen is that they will open up a number of cities, and my guess is those will be the more important economic cities for China. I think the central government realised that these severe lockdowns all over the country are causing a lot of economic concern, especially among locals. And as I said earlier, this is the reason why those people in Guangzhou were protesting. Those protests were getting more and more violent. They were hurling bottles and stones and things at the police there. So I think the conclusion from this is that I think the government are listening to the people. I actually believe the government want to open up as soon as possible, but I think they're also having to prepare the public in China for what's to come. There may be more deaths. They're encouraging more vaccination. There's a big rumour that the Chinese vaccine is not as efficient as the mRNA vaccines, but again, if you actually do your research and look, if you've had 3 of the Chinese vaccine, it's just as effective as mRNA vaccine. So that's something you need to do research on if you think otherwise. And yeah, as I say, it's very, very interesting. These cities are starting to open up and relax their COVID. My wife has told me there are still lockdowns, but it will be individual buildings. It will be for a shorter time, and there are less restrictions on the movement. I think if you still want to travel to a different city, you might have to have a 48 or a 24-hour negative test, but that's understandable. Now, as I say, my impression will be that they will slowly open up, and I think they will use some of these big cities as an experiment. Most of the problem will be in the rural areas because they don't have as many, the healthcare facilities in those rural areas are not so robust. And however, in the meeting, Sun Chunlan's meeting, was also mentioned that hospitals should prepare for more cases. So I think we're going to see a slow opening up, and hopefully over a period of a number of months we will get to a full opening up, and that's great news for everybody. These lockdowns have really caused a lot of problems for a lot of Chinese people. So yeah, it's great news that this is going to open up. Now, I just want to share this video clip with you on a more light-hearted note. I want to share this video clip with you at the end of this video because I thought this was quite funny. It's a guy, I'm not sure where it is in China, it's possibly Guangzhou, but I'm not sure, but it's a guy arguing with some epidemic prevention people. So take a look at this. But as always, for now, take care. 他妈的，你死鬼了！你他说要打人吗？他不说要打人吗？啊！你真厉害，咋回事啊？我来呀，哥们儿来，哥们儿，大哥，来呀，大哥，来呀，来呀，啊！